Hello, and welcome to Seed Legacies, Storage and Stewardship. I'm Sierra Kruger, the SSE Education and Engagement Intern, and I'll be your host for this session. Thank you to Humanities Iowa for sponsoring this session. As a note, you are welcome to add questions to the chat at any time during the presentation, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end during Q&A. So first, we're going to go through some community agreements here. So we ask that all participants in Seed the Future Grow Something Good conference be respectful, be curious, be patient, speak from your own experiences, try to avoid jargon, be conscious of intent versus impact, take space and make space, and take care of yourself. By embracing these community agreements, we embrace a collective responsibility to create spaces that are respectful, inclusive, and empowering for all. So we're here today with my good friend Evan Wisdom, and Evan Wisdom, she, they, is a PhD candidate in the Department of English at the University of Chicago. Her dissertation in progress, Seed Media, Emergent Forms for the Environmental Humanities, considers seeds in both fictional and real-world contexts to articulate their social, cultural, and political stakes in the ongoing climate crisis. She holds a BA Honors and MA from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, where she grew up. Today, Evan will be considering the crucial roles of contemporary agriculture's two dominant interrelated seed management systems: seed saving or banking initiatives that practice localized and ongoing stewardship around the world, and the Arctic stronghold that backs them all up, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. While both operations comprise urgently needed strategies in the face of climate change's unpredictable and unprecedented effects, the Svalbard Vault, often referred to in the media as the Doomsday Vault, carries significantly more weight in the cultural imaginary, possibly a consequence of its striking aesthetics. Its nickname that risks skewing the understanding of food systems, diminishing the urgency of the climate crisis, and eclipsing the importance of the less flashy but equally vital seed stewardship endeavors the world over. Join for a talk and discussion to explore how the discrepancy might be addressed and how the fundamental missions of seed saving and seed banking organizations might captivate the attention and generate the engagement they deserve. Thank you so much for being here, Evan. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much, Sierra. I really appreciate that introduction and overview. I'd also like to take a moment to say a quick thank you to Janine Sheffert, along with the whole team of folks at Seed Savers Exchange who worked so hard to make this amazing conference possible. Of course, also thank you to everyone who has joined for this talk today. So I've called my presentation Seed Legacies, Storage and Stewardship because I'm interested in exploring the two very different, though intimately related, seed management strategies that dominate contemporary agriculture: seed saving and seed banking. More specifically, I'm curious about how the Western cultural imaginary views these strategies, how people commonly think about them, understand or misunderstand them, undervalue or glorify them. I'm using the two categories, stewarding and storage, to help us think about these systems separately, though in many cases they are practiced in tandem, like here at Seed Savers Exchange. Under the umbrella of stewardship, I include the practices of growing, collecting, and saving seed in situ, or on-site. In other words, I'm talking about the localized and ongoing relationships of gardening, farming, and tending. By storage, on the other hand, I mean the systems that preserve seeds in suspended stasis for long periods of time, often in ex situ situations, meaning the seeds are banked in facilities sometimes quite far from their native soil or viable ecosystems. This latter strategy is best encapsulated in a project I'm sure you're all at least a little familiar with, the world's largest and most famous seed bank, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Now, I want to preface this discussion with a clarification. The purpose of this talk is not to make a value judgment. I will not be arguing that one method is better than the other. In fact, given the urgent and ongoing climate crisis, both systems are more crucial than ever to food security and agricultural networks the world over. But I am interested in how we collectively understand these practices and what we can learn from considering and comparing their respective histories and contexts. So, moment here. I will begin with a brief history of the rise of modern seed banking practices in contemporary agriculture, then turn to an overview of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. I'll then get into what I'm choosing to call the Doomsday Dilemma before wrapping up for the Q&A. Okay, so here we go. We can't talk about large-scale seed banking operations without talking about the Green Revolution, which is the general term for the rise of modern agriculture. More specifically, the Green Revolution refers to the worldwide implementation of American agronomic agendas in the second half of the 20th century. The name is fitting, for this truly was a revolution in the ways we grow food on a global scale. Although farmers had earlier discovered the benefits of hybrid breeding, the real turning point in agrotechnology occurred in 1946 when American plant breeder Norman Borlaug, pictured here, crossed Japanese semi-dwarf wheat strain Norin 10, which was acquired during the Allied occupation of Japan, with Mexican varietals sourced with funding from the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation. This cross produced high-yielding, disease-resistant wheat hybrids that quickly took over North American markets before being exported first to Mexico and then to Pakistan and India in the 1960s. With these seeds came the implementation of modernized agricultural practices that expanded mechanization and infrastructure and incorporated synthetic inputs, which is the catch-all term for fertilizers and pesticides. This is the system that dominates global agriculture today. The Green Revolution is credited with a drastic reduction in world hunger and a dramatic increase in food production in the latter half of the 20th century. But this technology transfer also had geopolitical stakes. Keep in mind, much of these developments occurred during the time of heightened Cold War anxieties around communism. It's no accident that the replication of American large-scale agricultural systems in developing countries ensured the establishment of capitalist economies on the quieter front lines of the Cold War. Even the term Green Revolution was coined as an implicit challenge to the Red Revolution's communist agenda. Of course, these systematized agricultural methods did not arrive in a vacuum. They supplanted traditional practices and transformed economic and power relations from local subsistence farming to global export networks. It's important to remember that regardless of its benefits and successes, modern large-scale agriculture was and still is imbricated in colonial and extractive legacies. As probably all of you already know, what the Green Revolution gained in terms of production value, it lost catastrophically in crop biodiversity. Because these strategies are invested primarily in scalability, they depend on simplification and homogenization. They maximize a select few successful crops by implementing industrially manufactured seed to generate vast monocultures. Soil care is neglected, hence the need for chemical fortifications in the form of fertilizers and pesticides. In contrast, traditional and regional-based farming practices promote the proliferation of crops and variability within individual species, according to fluctuating climates and localities. In some cases, the different varietals teased out of a single plant species number in the thousands. But in the past 50 years, this abundance has effectively evaporated. According to the most recent FAO report, fewer than 200 species of crops are cultivated to significant global production levels, with only 9 accounting for 2/3 of production weight. Corn, wheat, soy, rice, sorghum, and potatoes make up the bulk of these. What many of us find in grocery stores is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of potential diversity. But most of the general population doesn't realize just how limited the selection is. It's that old catch-22, you don't know what you don't know. Loss of biodiversity in agriculture is the result of the near total suppression of seed-saving practices. High-yielding hybrids seriously disincentivize farmers from saving seeds. Cultivating land races or ancient and traditional varietals is hardly lucrative in comparison and unfeasible at scale. Meanwhile, recuperating viable seed from hybrid crops is all but impossible, since natural reproduction through open pollination radically dilutes the hybrid vigor of industrially manufactured seeds. But since these seeds are hybrid crosses of purebred lines, their supercrops contain a narrower genetic blueprint than heirloom varietals. This makes them more susceptible to diseases, blights, and pests, and therefore more intensely reliant on pesticides and fertilizers. This concern was not lost on either the scientific community or the corporate entities that govern the agro-industrial system. Hence the birth of seed banks, facilities where the genetically rich heirlooms, land races, and crop wild relatives, in other words, all the seeds no longer planted on a massive scale, could be preserved. Even though not actively planted and farmed, these seeds and their genetic diversity could remain alive and well in suspended stasis. This is a photo of the Vavilov Institute located in Russia, which is often dubbed the world's first seed bank. It has a rather famous, though tragic, history. During Hitler's siege of Leningrad, the facility's staff starved to death defending its seeds, which represented a substantial amount of edible, nutritious food. Some accounts even describe Vavilov scientists fending off rats with metal rods. But even seed banks are fallible and vulnerable. Human error, political crisis, and natural disasters all threaten these facilities, which leads us to the backup of all backups, the world's largest and most iconic seed bank, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. On an isolated Norwegian archipelago well within the Arctic Circle, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault rises like an otherworldly fortress from the barren permafrost. Founded in 2008 by agriculturalist Carrie Fowler, the vault holds over 1 million crop varietals in its collection. Seed samples are sealed in custom-made 4-ply foil packets, cataloged and stacked in plastic crates on floor-to-ceiling industrial shelving in the vault's halls. These chambers maintain optimum moisture levels and a temperature of -18 degrees. The project is dedicated to establishing a genetic safeguard for humanity's crops, an emergency reserve for the world's agrobiodiversity in case of natural disaster or human catastrophe. This is a screenshot from the online virtual tour hosted on the Crop Trust website. I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already. It's really easy. You can just Google Crop Trust Virtual Svalbard Seed Bank Tour. It's got all these neat little information bulletins and videos. You can even hover over certain deposits to see where they came from. So this is the box that came from our very own Seed Savers exchange. The vault is designed as a bunker. It stretches deep into the mountain bedrock and is built to withstand nuclear disaster, sea level rise, and political uprisings, in the sense that it's so remotely located and on politically stable ground that they don't really have to worry about that. With its 4 locked doors, movement sensors, and coded keys, the tunnel is modeled on military facilities. The Svalbard Vault represents the prime archival fantasy, a safety blanket in the face of increasingly worsening prospects for human surviving and thriving. So it's no accident that the facility is perhaps better known. Oops. Oh, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty here, folks. Let's switch over to what thankfully is the printout version of my paper. It's no surprise that the facility is better known by its nickname, the Doomsday Vault. Okay. And things were going so well. So more than any other seed banking initiative, the Vault occupies a sensational, almost mythological place in the Western collective conscious. And this is why I'm calling this the Doomsday Dilemma, because to conceive of the Vault as a Noah's Ark thoroughly misconstrues its role in the agricultural complex and skews general understandings of the nature of our current food and climate crises. The Vault's dramatic presence in the Western cultural imaginary arises both from its futuristic aesthetics and the dystopian rhetorics commonly used to describe it, whether on its own website or in the media. Before it was even built, in a 2006 article in New Scientist, coined the term Doomsday Vault, and the nickname stuck. With its dramatic angular appearance and the scintillating art that adorns its front and roof, the Vault evokes a sense of wonder reminiscent of sci-fi space odysseys or Superman's Arctic fortress of solitude. Commenting on the Vault, the project architect Peter Soderman said, quote, "We wanted to create something that would set people's fantasies in motion," unquote. They were clearly successful. In a world in which apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic narratives are more popular and fascinating than ever, the Doomsday Vault plays into these dominant trends with aplomb. And no wonder, since it formulates its purpose in the context of apocalyptic probabilities. Catchphrases like "designed to stand the test of time," "the ultimate insurance policy," "deep inside a mountain on a remote island," and "the final backup" populate the Vault's webpage and evoke an almost mythological aura around the structure. So why is this a problem? First of all, it's important to note that this kind of formulation is rooted in established economies of power. As environmental historian Courtney Foley-Love explains, quote, in the later 20th century, national governments have invoked vocabularies of security and scarcity to administer food systems. These augment an older imperial lexicon of resources, stock, and treasury, and its ethnocentric adjuncts of natives, exotics, and invasions. So captive are we to this imaginary that it's hard to conceive of a style of preservation that eludes specters of threat and endangerment. Moreover, because although the Vault is of crucial importance to global agricultural systems, there's but one node in an incredibly complex network of relationships, labor, and land. The Vault is not actually meant to save the world in the face of an ultimate doomsday. It actually probably couldn't, for many reasons. For one, it's almost impossible to access, but more importantly, the seeds it contains might not be suitable to whatever environments we're left with. Cary Fowler himself clarifies that, quote, "We built this for the apocalypse that's happening every day in seed banks around the world, where unique varieties are lost and become extinct," end quote. But very few people understand the nature of these small apocalypses or their consequences. My fear is that public perception of the Doomsday Vault as some sort of ultimate safeguard excuses people from being accountable to and involved in issues of food security, environmental protection, and climate change mitigation. So while the vault itself does serve a very critical purpose, the way it has become mythologized and sensationalized in the media has actually been detrimental to political and environmental awareness regarding our very precarious food systems. A related problem is that this kind of storage system divorces seeds from their environments and climates, which means those particular seeds aren't adapting and evolving. It also separates the seeds from their stewards and cultural histories, and in so doing, it reinforces the philosophical divide between human and nature that justified extractive capitalism and precipitated the climate crisis in the first place. It's more important than ever to recognize that seeds and food are about being in relationship with the land and to cultivate a holistic understanding of our ecosystems and lifeways. That's where seed-saving practices come in. Seed saving represents the dynamic, involved alternative to seed banking's static, remote preservation method. In the wake of the Green Revolution, seed saving has come to designate projects specifically engaged in protecting, cultivating, and propagating traditional and heirloom seed varietals. While some seed-saving projects do store seed stock in seed banks, their primary method of conservation is through on-site cultivation that comprises long-term, thoughtful planning and labor-intensive farming practices such as hand pollination, weeding, and harvesting. Often central to these missions is a recognition of the cultural and historical significance of these crops and plants, which entails a commitment to keeping alive not just the seeds, but also their heritage, the oft undervalued farming practices, skills, and knowledge that fostered their lifeways. As such, many seed-saving initiatives are also deeply tied to anti-racist and decolonial movements and understand seeds as ancestors and companion species, rather than as commodities or resources. These projects embrace the importance of cultivating seed communities through circulation and exchange, often setting up seed libraries for sharing seeds, as well as knowledge about food, farming, and culture. In occupied America, seed legacies represent complex cultural and political entanglements stemming from the transatlantic slave trade and the colonization of indigenous lands. And many seed-saving organizations are working to reckon with these histories through initiatives like seed rematriation and education. For instance, Leah Penniman, the founder of Soulfire Farm and author and activist, charts the histories of Black farming on US soil and campaigns for Black liberation through food sovereignty. These are just a couple of other notable seed-saving initiatives in the US. Obviously, Seed Savers Exchange, Philadelphia's True Love Seeds, and Arizona's Native Seed Search. Imbricated in these seed-saving initiatives, inspiring artists, activists, farmers, and scholars from all over the globe advocate for the urgent transformation of farming practices and land relations in the fight for food sovereignty and restorative justice. So to recap the dilemma, if the general population operates under the misconception that we have to worry less about our food systems because of facilities like the Svalbard Vault, then people will be less likely to mobilize for food justice and act to mitigate the climate crisis. Moreover, if the public thinks the Svalbard Vault solves all the issues with regard to seed preservation, they are less likely to support or take an interest in the incredibly important seed-saving initiatives and practices that do sustain agrobiodiversity and sociocultural legacies. We need to recognize the Svalbard Global Seed Vault not as a fascinating quick-fix solution to a simple problem, but as a symptom of a much larger, alarmingly precarious system. Again, I do not believe that the founders of the Svalbard Vault anticipated, let alone orchestrated, this sensationalism, but we cannot deny its existence or its effects. I do not have a solution for this dilemma, but I believe that recognizing the phenomenon and thinking through its implications is the first step toward creating a holistic, realistic, and impactful understanding of our foodways. So that's a wrap for my talk. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very curious to hear your questions and thoughts.
Thank you so much, Evan. This was fantastic, and I think we all learned a lot from this. Just as a reminder, like Evan also said, feel free to add your questions to the chat at this time. And right now, I can add a few questions that I have that you might know the answer to. in the Svalbard Seed Vault, do you know where the largest donations of seed might come from? Do you have any idea?
I don't actually know that I could answer that question. They come from so many different seed banks from around the globe, and most of them are like regionally based in ways like Icarta would be one, which is the dry lands in the Middle East. But I mean, there's a significant amount from North America. All of that information is available on that website if you're curious about it. And they do have a rather lengthy and specific log of the seeds that have been donated, with a search engine that will allow you to search through them. It's a little bit clunky, but between the two, there's lots of interesting information available on that website. So I would recommend checking that out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then another question I have is, what kind of seeds do you think might be considered the most important to save? I know this is pretty specific, but
that is an interesting question. I think I hesitate to like make a judgment about importance. Obviously, important to whom would be my question, right? So, is obviously we want to be looking to save seeds that are going to be offering some form of, resistance to upcoming climate conditions. But I actually think that is not as important, in my opinion, as the seeds that have some form of cultural or historical or traditional significance. I think that by prioritizing something like genetics, we're doing disservice and even perhaps a violence to seeds, in the sense that we are just considering them as these resources, right? And that we really need to be doing both things, and that the second half of that thing is honoring their histories and the peoples who have stewarded them. And so that's what we've been neglecting to do. So I would tend to push toward that, at least at the moment, until we can find a balance. So I don't know whether I could pinpoint the most important ones. I think it's really situation dependent.
Yeah, I agree. So I have a question coming through the chat here that says, has anything ever been taken out of the Svalbard and used to retrieve lost varieties?
So there was one retrieval, one withdrawal rather, in 2017 by Icarta, actually, which is the seed bank that's in the Middle East, a seed bank that had to be abandoned because of the Syrian crisis in Aleppo, and was relocated to Lebanon, and they extracted, I think the number was about 30,000 seeds, and they are still in the process of growing them out and replicating them to be able to submit the deposit back to the seed bank. So it does work. This is, again, like, the system does work and it is necessary. I'm just, wondering why it needs to be necessary in a sense. But that was a successful withdrawal. If you are curious about knowing more about that, there's an amazing documentary called Wild Relatives by Jumana Mana, which came out, I want to say about 5 years ago, that documents that entire situation, but from Svalbard to the Middle East, and really gets into those kinds of issues. Really phenomenal piece of art also. So I don't think that it's publicly accessible, but I do think that you can rent it on Vimeo.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So it looks like we might have one last question that we have time to answer here. It said that there was some concern about a decade ago that SSE's accessions would be made available to agribusiness companies through Svalbard's terms of agreements. To your knowledge, has this happened?
Okay, I'm not entirely sure about that particular instance of concern, but I can speak more to the black box system that is the way that the vault works. So every time the vault accepts a new donation, that donation is essentially black boxed to the seed bank from which it came. So the only people that are able to access the seeds are the seed banks that deposited the seeds in the first place. So this is another kind of misconception about the vault, that it's some kind of like commons, some kind of like publicly accessible or kind of global commons of resources, when really it really is particular to each organization that deposits seeds. So I highly doubt that any of the seeds that are in there have become accessible to big agribusiness. I will say though that big agribusiness is and it represents a significant investor in the vault, and you can find this information on that website too. So big companies like Bayer, Syngenta, there's money in there. So it's not, nothing is black and white. But to my knowledge, the actual seeds or the genetic information that those seeds comprise has remained, the property of whatever organization made the deposit.
Okay, I think we have time to answer one last question here really quick. So Sean also has a question. Those custom 4-ply foil storage packets available to the public for storage?
That's a really good question. I mean, I know Seed Savers has them, so I don't know where you order them. I mean, I think that would be a pretty easy thing to find out. I probably they would be. I know that you have to vacuum seal them and everything, and like be very deliberate about how you then store them, and then also unfreeze them so that moisture doesn't get into the pack. And there's a way to do it, but I wouldn't be surprised that you could find a way to gain access to them through somehow. I think that's a great question to ask the preservation department. That's easy.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's about all that we have time for. But I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this with us today. It's been a joy to have you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for dealing with my momentary, technical difficulties.
You did great. You did great.
I'm really glad I printed this paper. Well, anyway, thank you so much, Sierra. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
You as well.